My son evicted me 3 days after my wife's funeral. Then 83 recordings revealed everything. The cardboard box in my hands contained 61 years of my life, and my son was holding. The door opened like I was a stranger who had overstayed his welcome. That was 3 days after we buried Margaret. 3 days after I had stood at her grave in the November rain, holding a single white rose against my chest, whispering her name into the cold air like a prayer I didn't know how to finish. 3 days after the last of the casseroles had been delivered, the last of the condolence cards had arrived, the last of the neighbors had squeezed my hand and said, "Call us if you need anything," which, as any widower over the age of 70 knows, really means please don't actually call us. My name is Daniel Hargrove. I am 74 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in November, my son Brandon told me I had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. I want to tell you this story properly because it deserves to be told properly, not as a tale of bitterness, though God knows there were moments of that, not as a cautionary warning, though perhaps it is that too. I want to tell it the way Margaret would have told it, with all the complicated, painful, ultimately extraordinary truth of what happened when a dying woman spent the last 18 months of her life filling a recorder the size of a deck of cards with everything she knew, everything she feared, and everything she needed the people she loved to finally hear. 83 recordings, 47 hours and 22 minutes of audio. Margaret made them all herself, alone in our bedroom while I thought she was napping. Part 1. The House on Clover Lane. Margaret and I bought the house on Clover Lane in 1989 for $87,000. We thought we were spending an obscene amount of money. We argued about the mortgage for 2 weeks before signing, sitting at the kitchen table of our apartment with a calculator between us like a referee. "Daniel," she said, "if we don't take risks, we don't get to have a life." She was always the braver one. We raised 2 children in that house. Brandon, our eldest, came first in 1981, a serious, determined boy who grew into a serious, determined man. Then Cassie arrived in 1984, quiet and dreamy, the kind of child who collected interesting rocks and named each one. Brandon became a real estate developer. Cassie became a middle school art teacher. I retired from 38 years as a civil engineer. Margaret spent 22 years as a school librarian, then spent her retirement doing exactly what she'd always done as a librarian, connecting people to stories they didn't know they needed. For a long time, we were happy in the way that long marriages are happy, not always joyful, not always easy but steady. The way a river is steady, always moving, sometimes turbulent, but fundamentally going somewhere together. Then Margaret got sick. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed on a Wednesday in April, 2 years before everything I'm about to describe. The doctor used words that landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, treatable but aggressive, difficult to predict. Margaret held my hand so hard I lost feeling in 2 fingers. On the drive home, she stared out the passenger window for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she turned to me and said, "I need you to make me a promise." "Anything," I said, and I meant it completely. "I need you to promise me that after I'm gone, you're going to be okay." I told her I would be. I told her I'd be fine. I had no idea what fine was going to cost me. Part 2. Brandon. I should be fair to my son, because the truth is always more complicated than the headline. Brandon was not a bad child. He was a driven child, which in many households gets mistaken for the same thing, but it isn't. He wanted to succeed in a way that was almost physical, like hunger. I never fully understood where it came from. Margaret understood it better than I did. She understood both our children better than I did. if I'm being truthful with myself, which I'm trying to be. He built a successful real estate development company through his 30s and 40s. He married a woman named Renata, elegant and sharp-minded, who came from a wealthy family. In Connecticut, they had 2 children, our grandchildren, Oliver and Priya, who I saw perhaps 4 or 5 times a year, never as often as I wanted to. The distance between Brandon and me was not dramatic. It was not the result of any single argument or wound. It was the accumulated distance of 2 people who loved each other but didn't particularly understand each other, and who had never found the exact right moment to close the gap. I assumed we'd get there eventually. I assumed there was time. When Margaret got sick, Brandon came to visit twice in 22 months. He sent flowers. He called every Sunday for about 4 months. Then the calls became every other Sunday, then twice a month, then sporadic. I told myself he was busy. I told Margaret the same thing. She would nod and look at me with those dark eyes of hers. She had extraordinary eyes, brown and deep and endlessly patient. And she wouldn't say anything. At the time, I thought she was agreeing with me. I know now she was deciding something. Part 3, the last autumn. Margaret died on November 8th, on a Saturday in our bedroom, with me beside her and Cassie holding her other hand. It was early morning, the sky outside still the dark blue of almost dawn. She went quietly, which was both a mercy and something that stunned me completely, because I had braced myself for more difficulty, and quiet felt wrong, insufficient, as though the universe owed her more ceremony than it offered. Brandon arrived for the funeral. He was composed and efficient, and handled the logistics. I was too grief-stunned to manage the funeral home, the flowers, the reception at the house. Afterward, I was grateful for that. I told him so. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "Of course, Dad," and for 2 days I let myself believe that grief had opened something between us. On the morning of the 3rd day after the funeral, a Tuesday, Brandon came downstairs while I was at the kitchen table, Margaret's old kitchen table, the one with the scar along the left edge, where Brandon himself had once dragged a toy truck across the surface when he was 4. And he set a manila folder in front of me. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you about the house." I thought he meant something practical, maintenance. Maybe he was going to offer help with repairs. "The property's worth about $800,000 now," he said, sitting across from me, "maybe more. And I've been looking at your finances, and I think it makes more sense for you too." "You've been looking at my finances," he explained carefully. That Margaret had added him to her financial accounts 2 years ago, at the start of her illness, as a precaution. I hadn't known that. It landed strangely, but I told myself it was reasonable. She'd been thinking ahead, being practical, being Margaret. What Brandon said next was not reasonable. He told me he wanted to sell the house. He told me the proceeds, split according to the will, would give me enough to move into a comfortable senior living community. He had brochures which he had already printed, which he now slid across the table. He told me that maintaining a 4-bedroom house was too much for one person, that it wasn't practical, that Margaret herself had apparently discussed this with him. "She discussed selling my home with you," I said. "Our family home, Dad. While she was dying, she was thinking about your future, about what was best for you." I looked at the brochures. They had photographs of smiling elderly people doing chair yoga and eating salads. They had words like community and vibrant and enriching used in ways that meant the opposite of those words. "Brandon," I said, "your mother died 3 days ago." "I know, Dad. That's why we need to have this conversation now while I'm here." 2 weeks, he said. He wasn't kicking me out, that was important, he said. He was simply asking me to start the process, to begin looking at options, to be realistic about what made sense going forward. He was 52 years old and speaking to me in the tone of someone who has already made a decision and is now managing the announcement of it. I sat in Margaret's kitchen, at Margaret's table, and I felt something I had never felt before in my life, completely alone. Part 4. Cassie. I called Cassie that evening. She answered on the second ring. She always answered quickly. Our Cassie, always a little breathless, like she was afraid of missing something. I know, she said before I'd finished explaining. Brandon called me. He called you first. He called me this morning, before he talked to you, I think. A long pause. Dad, he mentioned. Mom had been talking to him about plans for after. What plans? Another pause, longer this time. I don't know everything, but apparently there's some paperwork. I think you should come stay with me for a few days. I think there are some things we need to figure out together. Cassie lived 40 minutes away in a small house outside of town with her husband Paul and their teenage daughter Emma. I packed a bag. I drove away from Clover Lane with the windows down despite the November cold because I needed the air on my face, needed the sensation of something moving. I didn't know that sitting in Cassie's guest room closet was a shoebox with a small digital recorder inside it, a charger coiled neatly beside it, and a handwritten note taped to the lid in Margaret's distinctive, looping script. The note said, "For Daniel, when you're ready, all my love always." Part 5. The box. Cassie had not opened the box. She told me she'd found it 3 weeks before Margaret died, tucked behind a set of old photo albums in the closet while she was helping Margaret organize some things. Margaret had simply said, "That's for your father. You'll know when to give it to him." 3 days after my son asked me to leave my house, my daughter handed me a shoebox. I sat in her guest room with it on my lap for a long time before I opened it. Inside, one small digital recorder, black, with a sticker on the back in Margaret's handwriting that said, "Press play, start at 1. I love you, Daniel," and beside it, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a numbered list, 83 entries, each with a title she'd given to each recording. I looked at the list for a long time. Some titles were simple, about the garden, the trip to Portugal 1997, things I never told you about my mother. Some were harder to read. What I need you to understand about Brandon, the money and why I did what I did, forgiveness. What I'm asking of you. I pressed play. Her voice came out of that small speaker and filled the room, and I put my hand over my mouth and held it there until the wave passed. "Hello, my love. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. I'm sorry about that. I had a lot more I wanted to say to you in person, and I ran out of time, which is really just the most unfair thing. But I had 18 months to think, which is more than most people get, and I used it. I filled this little recorder with everything I needed you to know. Some of it is going to be hard to hear. Some of it you already know. Some of it is just me talking to you, because even when I'm gone, I'm going to want to talk to you. That was always my favorite thing. Okay, are you ready? I love you more than I have ever been able to say. Start at number 1. Part 6, 47 hours. I listened over 4 days. Cassie brought me food and left me alone. Paul kept Emma occupied with errands and outings, giving me the silence the house rarely had. I sat in the guest room with the recorder on the nightstand, and I listened to my wife. The early recordings were gentle, stories about our life together, memories she wanted to preserve, things she was grateful for. She talked about our first apartment, about the night Brandon was born, about a vacation we'd taken to Maine in 1993 that I had half forgotten, and she had apparently been carrying in perfect detail for 30 years. She described the smell of the ocean. She described the way I'd look standing at the water's edge, younger, lighter before The weight of everything. Then around recording number 15, her voice shifted. "I need to tell you about Brandon," she said, "and I need you to listen without the version of him you've decided on. I need you to see what I saw. What followed was not a condemnation of our son. It was something more complicated, a mother's careful, loving, heartbroken analysis of a child she had watched struggle his entire life with something she didn't have a clean word for. Insecurity, she said, wasn't quite right, though it was part of it. Need, she said, an enormous, consuming need to be significant, to matter, to be the one who had done the most, given the most, succeeded the most. She talked about things I hadn't known, about conversations she'd had with Brandon over the years, long phone calls when I wasn't there, in which he'd reveal anxieties and resentments he never showed to me, his sense that I had always been harder on him than on Cassie, a perception I hadn't known he held, and which landed in me like a cold stone even now, delivered through a voice recorder in a guest room, his feeling that success in my eyes required a specific kind of achievement he could never fully reach. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," Margaret said carefully. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand where he's coming from. What happened after I'm gone isn't going to make sense unless you understand that Brandon has been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and he doesn't know how to put it down." The recordings about money came later. Recordings 50 through 62, she had titled them collectively in her list, "The Arrangements and Why I Made Them." I won't pretend these were easy to hear. Margaret had, in fact, made arrangements with Brandon, but not the ones he had described to me. She had not asked him to sell the house. She had not suggested a senior living facility. What she had done, what she had explicitly put in writing, she told me, with a lawyer who was not the family lawyer, in a document I had not known about, was establish a trust in my name that protected my right to live in the house for as long as I chose to, regardless of what anyone else wanted. She had done this specifically because she had feared, with the clear-eyed practicality that defined her, that her death would create a power vacuum that Brandon, loving and flawed and desperate to matter, might move to fill. "I know my son," she said on recording 54, her voice steady and a little tired. "I know what he's going to do because I've watched him do smaller versions of it his whole life. He's going to tell himself it's for your own good. He might even believe it, but he's also going to be thinking about the property value, and about being the one who handled everything, and about finally being the person in charge. And Daniel, my love, I need you to know that I made sure he can't. I made sure you're protected, but I also need you to understand why he's doing it, because anger without understanding is just damage, and you've got too much living left to do to spend it angry." She named the lawyer, she named the document, she told me in careful detail where to find the copies. She had thought of everything. Part 7, recordings 70 through 83. The final recordings were different. Some were practical instructions for the garden, the location of important papers, the name of the furnace repair company we'd used for 20 years and whom she trusted completely. Some were funny, or tried to be. Recording 77 was titled Things I Was Never Able to Throw Away and Why, and it was 11 minutes of Margaret explaining, with enormous affection and self-awareness, why she had kept every birthday card I'd ever given her in a shoebox under the bed, including several that were, she admitted, objectively not very good cards. "Daniel, I don't know what you were thinking." And some were what I can only describe as love letters, long, unhurried, intimate in the way that only decades of shared life makes possible. She talked about what she was going to miss. She talked about being afraid, which she had almost never admitted to me while she was alive. She talked about what she hoped for me, not in platitudes but specifically. She hoped I would Learn to cook more than the 4 things I currently knew how to cook. She hoped I would visit Portugal, which we'd always said we'd go back to and hadn't. She hoped I'd let Cassie take me to her church sometimes, not because she thought I'd find God there necessarily, but because she'd noticed I was lonely in ways that needed community, and Cassie's church had good people in it. Recording 83 was the last. "Hello, Daniel," she said. "If you've made it here, I'm proud of you. I know some of this was hard. I know you're going to want to call me and argue with me about some of it, and I'm sorry I won't be there to argue back. You know I would have. I want to say one more thing before I let you go." She paused. I could hear her breathing. I could hear faintly what I thought was birdsong through a window. "Don't grieve me in a way that makes you smaller," she said. "I've seen people do that. I've seen people lose someone and then spend the rest of their years getting careful, getting cautious, closing doors because the risk of loss is too great. I understand the impulse. I do. But Daniel, I need you to hear me. You are still here. You are still fully, completely here with all this living left in you, and I need you to use it. Plant something in the garden. Finish the bookshelf in the garage that you've been claiming you're going to finish since 2016. Call Cassie too often. Forgive Brandon, not for him, for you. Go to Portugal." She paused again. "I have loved you for 52 years. I intend to keep loving you from wherever I am, which I choose to believe is somewhere good, somewhere beautiful, somewhere I can see the ocean. But you need to do the living for both of us now. That's the deal. That's what I'm asking. Goodbye, my love. Go live." The recording ended. I sat in Cassie's guest room for a long time after that. Outside, it had started to snow, the first real snow of the year, quiet and steady, covering everything in the tentative white of a beginning. Part 8. What happened next? I called the lawyer Margaret had named. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she was competent and kind, and she confirmed everything Margaret had described. The trust was real. My right to remain in the house was protected. Brandon's authority over my living situation was, in fact, essentially non-existent. Patricia also told me something else. She had expected my call. Margaret had asked her when they'd set everything up to be available when I reached out. Your wife was very thorough, Patricia said, which was perhaps the most accurate summation of Margaret Hargrove I have ever heard from someone who only met her once. The conversation with Brandon was not easy. I had 4 days with Cassie to sit with everything. Margaret had said to try to approach it the way Margaret had asked me to, with understanding, without simply converting my pain into anger and handing it to him like a weapon. I don't know how well I succeeded. I'm human. There were moments in the conversation when I lost that thread. But I told him what I knew. I told him I had listened to 83 recordings his mother had made. I told him about the trust. I told him I knew he had been hurting in ways I hadn't seen, and that I was sorry for the part I had played in that, and that I was also not going to leave my home. He was silent for a long time. She left you recordings, he finally said. His voice was different, younger somehow. Composed efficiency was gone. 47 hours of them. Another silence. Did she? He stopped. She understood you, I said. That's what she wanted me to understand. She was very careful to explain who you are. She loved you, Brandon, completely. He didn't speak for a moment, and then I heard something that I hadn't heard from my son since he was a child, a sound that wasn't quite crying, but was the sound of someone very close to it. We talked for 2 hours. We didn't resolve everything. That would be dishonest to suggest. There were things said and unsaid that are still in the air between us, still finding their way towards something, but we talked, really talked the way Margaret had always wanted us to talk. The way I think she'd always hoped we would get to eventually. I think she knew we needed her to be gone to get there. I think that was the hardest part of what she understood. Epilogue: Clover Lane in spring. I am still in the house. It is April now, 5 months after the funeral, and I am in the backyard doing exactly what Margaret asked, planting something in the garden. Specifically, I am planting the heirloom tomatoes she always grew along the south fence, which require more attention than is strictly reasonable, but which produce, by August, tomatoes that taste the way tomatoes are supposed to taste, which is to say, like the memory of summer. The bookshelf in the garage is 70% finished. I am counting that as progress. I go to Cassie's church on the second Sunday of every month. She was right, the people are good. There is a man there named Harold who is 78 and a retired marine biologist, and who has, it turns out, been to Portugal 4 times and is willing to talk about it at great length if given the opportunity, which I have taken to providing. Brandon came to visit last month with Renata and the grandchildren. Oliver is 14 now and taller than I am. Priya is 11 and has developed an unexpected passion for birdwatching, which I find completely delightful. We spent a Saturday afternoon in the backyard with a field guide identifying the birds at the feeder Margaret had hung from the maple tree in 2014. It was not a large thing, it was everything. Brandon and I are finding our way. It is slow, it is real. Some nights I sit in the kitchen after dinner and I talk to Margaret. I know she can't hear me. Or maybe I don't know that, depending on the night. I tell her about the garden and the grandchildren and Harold's Portugal stories. I tell her I'm working on the bookshelf. I tell her what I cooked for dinner, which has expanded to 9 things, which is more than double what I managed when she was here, and which I consider a significant personal achievement. I have not yet gone to Portugal, but I have a library book about Lisbon on the nightstand. I think she'd count that. The 83 recordings are on my phone now. Cassie helped me transfer them because I am 74 years old and the technology involved was frankly aggressive. I listen to one sometimes when I need to, not every day, not even every week, but sometimes the house gets very quiet in a way that is different from peaceful quiet, and on those evenings I press play and Margaret's voice fills the room, and she is telling me about Portugal or the tomatoes or something I did in 1987 that she apparently found endearing, and the house becomes the house again. You are still fully, completely here, she said. I am working on believing her. I plant another tomato seedling in the April earth, pressing it in gently the way she showed me. Careful with the roots. The sun is warm on the back of my neck, somewhere in the maple tree. One of Priya's birds is making its case for the afternoon. I think Margaret would have loved this. And then I think she does. In memory of all the people who loved us more carefully than we knew, and who made arrangements we only discovered when we needed them most.